Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the very first episode of what I hope is going to be many to come of my new series where I try to not only go over decks and deck building specifically geared towards certain heroes or certain factions, but also we go over how to play. So those of you guys who, maybe you go on Reddit and you ask for some deck advice and you fix your deck to make it slightly better and you still can't win. I'm hoping to target you guys, sort of go over what decks are supposed to do and how you can win with them. So for today's deck specifically, I decided to target Cassandra, and the reason for this is pretty simple, and it's a starting hero for Haven. It's also the hero that I started with. She's a lot of people think they have the mindset that starter heroes are not as good as other heroes. For instance, a lot of people play Aaliyah because she has fire magic and she's different, but Cassandra is actually, believe it or not, one of the top tier heroes right now, and I'm gonna hopefully help you guys understand the reason for that today, and yeah, hopefully help you guys out that are struggling a little bit. So before today, I tried to ask some of you, or at least people on Reddit, if they would be kind enough to sort of share with me things that they've done with Cassandra that have gone wrong. And I appreciate everyone. If one of you guys is tuning in who has sent me in one of these decks, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. So right here we can see 3 decks that people have submitted that they think they could do a little bit better with on the ladder. So before I go into these, I think this deck gives the greatest example of what we need to discuss first, and that is the basics of building a deck. Now, if you look at this, obviously every hero has 3 attributes. We have Might, Magic, and Destiny. And obviously this Might lets you deploy creatures, Magic lets you play spells, and Destiny lets you play fortunes. But for anyone at home, if I refer to Might, Magic, and Destiny, that's what I'm talking about. And every hero has their own different starting attributes, but I'm going to go over why each one is important here. And first we're going to start with basically a deck should consist of 2 of these, not all 3. And you see Cassandra here starting with 1 Might, 1 Magic, and 2 Destiny. That does not mean that Cassandra needs to go for fortunes in her deck. She has Light and Wind Magic, schools, which are not the best, and she has no special ability, so perhaps her spells and creatures are not the best thing about her, and perhaps starting with 2 Destiny is something you could look into as possibly helpful. But the biggest downfall of new decks is that they try to do it all. So if you look at this deck here, you see he has some good creatures, and a lot of people call these auto-include cards like the Dark Assassin, the Pow Deathseeker. The Radiant Glory is considered one of the best Haven cards outside of the Wolf Captain, which you don't see here, as Wolf Captains are epics and hard to come by early on. So having these creatures, when I look at this right away, this looks good. And then he's also decided to include some spells. And to note about these creatures is the highest Might cost he has here is 4, and that's from the Warrior Seraph. And if you look at the spells, now he has all of these sort of what I would call expensive spells, and he has 4 Magic here, 4 Magic here, Cyclones are 4, Lightning Bolt is 4. He has a lot of expensive cards that require 4 Magic. So already, just with these cards here, he's already up to 4 Might, 4 Magic, and that would be a good place to stop. Your hero can only level so many attributes per turn, and by so many I mean 1. So you really have to make a choice every time you have a turn of which attribute you want to level up. Unfortunately, you can't level all 3, and at least not in a timely or effective manner. And this deck in particular does also go into fortunes. You see he has Cassandra's Imperial Devotion, which is an epic fortune. It's unique, so you can only have one of them in your deck, and it's quite good. This can often change an entire battle. I've seen one game in particular where Susu used to play a deck, Siegfried deck, this guy right here, the image. He used to play a Siegfried deck, and there was one game in particular that was I saw streamed, and this card basically turned him from 2 health and no creatures on the board to a full board with about 16 health, and he just crushed the game. So I can see why he wanted to include this deck here, and this is our good friend Orim's Chant. So if you see him online, hopefully he's improved the deck since then. I don't know that he has, because I already gave him some feedback, I think. But yeah, so we already have our first major problem with the initial deck building phase, which is 4 Might, 4 Magic, and 4 Destiny. And that is just too hard to do. When you start with 1-1-2, that means that you need to spend 3 turns leveling Might, 3 turns leveling Magic, 2 turns leveling Destiny. And you don't want to spend that many turns leveling, because you need to spend turns drawing cards. Because eventually, as the turns go on, and as you play more of these Tithe Collectors, or just in general you're playing more cards as you have more resources, you're going to run out of cards, and you're going to need to draw cards to make up for it. So spending too much time leveling takes away from that, and it also leads up to a lot of problems in your hand. If you're holding, for instance, when you're dealt your starting hand of 7 cards, let's say you get like both Warrior Seraphs, Lightning Bolts, this, and some other random cards. Already you have your most expensive options in your deck, and you're going to struggle with which one you should be leveling first. So that's a bad thing to have to try to decide what to level. You always need to have a plan. When you draw your first cards, you need to say, alright, I'm going to level my Might up to 3 so I can get my Radiant Glories out, and then I'm going to level my Fortunes so I can control the board with Broken Bridges or gain some extra cards from Campfire and help that way. So already looking here, we can see one downfall of building decks. So what you want to do to improve this is focus on 2 of these things. So it's very, very possible to have all of these creatures, all of these spells, and then you'll be adding in a couple more of each, obviously, to make up for these lack of fortunes. But if you just have these, it's actually a much better deck already. A lot of these creatures are pretty good. Obviously he's missing Wolf Captains, which is key, but I think that modified these spells slightly and you could probably get to 1000 elo with this deck, as long as you play it properly. And yeah. Or if you take out all the spells and you focus with creatures and fortunes, I think that would also be equally successful. And yeah, just looking over at chat. Hi, Peon Powa. What's up, man? I will be recommending Haven decks without fancy expansion cards. I'll actually be building one myself later on, so just stick around and that will hopefully happen. Oh, what's up, man? What's up, Orms? Glad to hear that you are improving. 950 elo, that's awesome. Congratulations. You're well on your way. 1000 is the benchmark of success in this game. So good luck, man. Hope you hit it soon. Alright. So as you see, there was one example of a deck, and we'll just move on to the next one here. And this one by Harbatkin, you see that his balance is 31 creatures, 12 spells, 7 fortunes. He has a lot going on with his events there, which is not quite important for what we're discussing, but that's generally bad if you have one of everything like that. And Week of the Dead doesn't help this deck in any way. But instead of focusing on that, let's look at his creatures here. You see that he has a decent number of low-cost creatures. And then he has some 3-cost creatures, quite a few, there's 10. And then he has a good amount of 4-cost creatures as well. So I want to sort of point out that this is what you would call a curve that's fairly linear. You see you have 4 1 cost, which is about the average. Most decks only have 4 1 cost creatures anyways. Then he has all of these 2 cost creatures here. That's 10 2 cost, so that's 14 1 and 2 cost creatures. And I would consider that to be a lot of 2 cost or lower. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, that's what Haven is sort of known for. They have all these low cost creatures, particularly with wolf captains, and that is sort of what they go for. They try to get a lot of board presence with their cheap creatures, play them all over, use their defensive capabilities with the Holy Praetorian, and sort of win games through poking them down with their weaker creatures. Now, he also has these spells here. Sunburst is a good spell. Word of Light is a good spell. Lightning Bolt and Bless are interesting spells, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then his fortunes here are Fortified Outpost and Gold Pile. Now, both of these are easily includable because they only have a 2 destiny requirement, and since Cassandra starts with 2, that's actually not a problem to get these fortunes here. This Fortified Outpost, it says you draw a card, or if your opponent has more creatures on the battlefield, then you gain 4 resources. So if you ever have a card like this, it costs 2 and it says draw a card, you never want to do that part of it unless you're absolutely in a bind and you have to. The goal of this card is that your opponent will have more creatures on the battleground than you, and you'll be gaining 4 resources. That's what you want every time out of this card. Now, just to hit specifically on Haven, like I was saying earlier, if you were listening just a second ago, there's a lot of low-cost creatures here. What this means is that you're easily going to be able to get multiple units on the board in each turn. This also means that you're likely going to often have more creatures on the battlefield than your opponents. So this card in itself is sort of contradicting what this deck is already good at. So this fortune is not something I would include in most Haven decks. Now, revisiting these spells here, this will go into tie in well with what I wanted to talk about next, which is basically you have to utilize the strengths of a deck and then also recognize their weaknesses. So the strength here of this Haven deck is that you can get a lot of defensive creatures down. You can get Holy Praetorians in the front line, Radiant Glories behind them, and you have 4 damage in one line attacking at your enemies, and it's very well defended by the Holy Praetorian from a lot of creatures in other decks. So the goal of the Haven deck here is to get a lot of board presence, and by that I mean you're playing as many creatures as you can to sort of put pressure on the enemy. So your goal is to continue having more board presence and continue applying pressure to the enemy so he has to try to play against you instead of playing his own game. So right off the bat though, looking at these cards, you notice that the highest damage any of them have is 3. So Haven decks on their own always have low damage. They don't have stronghold units that can deal 4 damage at 4 cost like the Tainted Orc. They don't have an epic like double attack Cyclops that can just rampage you. They have these solid units that have pretty high health, regeneration capabilities or heal, and just general defensive abilities. So the strength of this deck is getting on the board and then staying there and slowly whittling down the enemy. Now, so what does happen if you have a bunch of these low-cost creatures out and your opponent plays something like a Tainted Orc or something like that, and you can't kill it in one shot and it's going to slowly eat away at your units? Well, that's why Harbatkin has included spells like Lightning Bolt. So this deals 6 damage to one creature, and while it's an expensive spell, has 4 magic requirement, Sage is a lot to one thing. So right away he's addressing his main weakness of having low attack. So the purpose of this spell is to make up for what he can't do, which is just clear a giant fatty out of the way. If he